Welcome to the online classroom for 4th semester English Honours curriculum. Today we will discuss the poem London by Dr. Samuel Johnson. This poem was first written in the year 1738 and was revised exactly 10 years later in 1748. And the text that we will follow in our present discussion is the latter version of the text. The author, Dr. Samuel Johnson, as we all know, was a very noted man of letters of the 18th century. He was born in 1709 and he passed away in the year 1784. He was a playwright, come essayist, come editor, come lexicographer, come biographer. In short, he was a jack of all trades as well as a master of all trades. And today he is best remembered for his monumental work, A Dictionary of the English Language, which was published in 1755 and was the first properly scientifically compiled dictionary of English. This particular poem, London, which is subtitled A Poem in Imitation of the Third Satire of Juvenal, is a political satire by Dr. Johnson, who was a committed Tory all through his life. And this subgenre, the neoclassical subgenre of imitation, was popular throughout the 17th and the 18th centuries. And even before Dr. Johnson, this particular poem, this particular satire, the third satire by Roman poet Juvenal, was also adapted into a similar imitation by John Oldham in the year 1682. And in the year 1693, this same third satire by Juvenal was translated into English by John Dryden. The original classical poet Juvenal, whose actual name was Decimus Junius Juvenalis, was a Roman poet of the 1st and the 2nd centuries BCE. And he principally wrote satires targeting the moral foibles, moral depravities, vices, and follies of the citizens of Rome in his lifetime. And Juvenalian satires differ from the Horatian satires by their tone of moral austerity, which is absent in the Horatian satires. Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock is a Horatian satire. Here the tone is not so harsh, not so morally austere, and the satirist often seems to be enjoying the follies that he is simultaneously criticizing in a very mild and patronizing tone. But in Juvenalian satire, there is no patronizing tone present in the voice of the satirist, but the satirist aims at scourging humankind for its follies, foibles, and vices. And Juvenalian satire often appears to be less witty and less refined than the Horatian satires. In Horatian satire, we find a sort of urbane sophistication, which is often absent in the Juvenalian satires. This particular poem, London, which was written in imitation of the third satire of Juvenal, the main narrating persona, the principal narrating persona, is Thales, who is the friend of the poet, or the narrating persona of the poet, who narrates the poem up to line 34. From line 35 onwards, the rest of the poem is a speech by Thales. Now, Thales is the name of a pre-Socratic ancient Greek philosopher come astronomer of the 5th century BCE. Here in this poem, Dr. Johnson chooses to use the particular name Thales as the spokesperson of his satire, which is directed principally against the political foibles of his time, political foibles that he found in the society of London during his lifetime. The poem begins with an epigraph which is a Latin quotation from the original Juvenalian satire. It goes like this: Quis ineptae tam patiens ubis, tam ferios ut teniat se, which means, who can endure this monstrous city? Who can tolerate, who can bear with this devilish, monstrous city? Who is so iron-willed that he can bear it? Who has that strength of mind with which he can bear with it, with which he can tolerate the monstrosity of this city? Now, Juvenal targeted the Roman society in his satire, but here in London, obviously Dr. Johnson targets the London society for its foibles, follies and vices. And it is far more politically oriented than the original Juvenalian satire. Juvenal's target was the social, moral and ethical foibles, moral depravities of the Roman people at large. But Johnson chooses this satire to be a political satire targeted chiefly against his political enemies, the Whigs, and especially in particular against the policies of Sir Robert Walpole, who was the first de facto British Prime Minister. Now the poem begins. As I told earlier, the first 34 lines are spoken by the poet himself, or the narrating persona whom the poet chooses for himself. And from line 35 onwards, the rest of the poem is the speech by Thales. So the poem begins like this. Though grief and fondness in my breast rebel, when injured Thales bids the town farewell, yet still my calmer thoughts his choice commend. I praise the hermit, but regret the friend. Now, from the first 4 lines, it is obvious that the poet's friend, Thales, is about to leave the city of London, and this fact both saddens the poet and evokes the fondness that he has for his dear friend. The poet says in the very first line of the poem that in his heart, in his breast, 2 feelings are contesting each other, 2 feelings of sadness, of grief, and of fondness are fighting with each other. When injured Thales, when Thales, who is injured, who is himself saddened, aggrieved, and affected by the vices of the London society, has decided to bid farewell to this city, when he has decided to leave this city forever. Yet still my calmer thoughts his choice commend. But the poet says that when I think with a calm mind, when I can ponder very calmly on my friend's decision, I cannot help praising his decision. I must praise, I must commend, appreciate his decision, his choice. I praise the hermit but regret the friend. He says that I must praise the sagacious decision of this hermit. He calls Thales a hermit because by taking the decision to leave London forever, Thales seems to be showing his sagacity, his farsightedness, his wisdom, which the poet thinks must be praised, must be appreciated, but regret the friend. But in spite of all that, he must regret the loss, the absence of his dear friend, who now resolves from vice and London far to breathe in distant fields a purer air. So I regret the absence of that friend who now has taken a strong resolution, a strong decision to move far away from the vicious city of London. Here, this line, who now resolves from vice and London far, contains the figure of speech called zeugma. A zeugma is a rhetorical figure in which two or more substantives or nouns are linked with and made dependent upon a single verb. So, who now resolves from vice and London far, who now has taken decision to move far away from vice and London. It actually means the vices contained in London, the vicious city of London, to breathe in distant fields a purer air. So he has decided to move to the countryside, to move to the villages of England where he could breathe fresher air, purer air, which is not polluted by the vices and the physical pollutants that the city of London offers. And fixed on Cambria's solitary shore, give to Saint David one true Brighton more. And it seems that his friend Thales has decided to settle in Cambria, which is the ancient name for the Wales. The Wales, the particular region, the particular province of England. So he has decided to fix himself in, he has decided to settle in the province called Cambria or the Wales. And there he could offer to Saint David, who was regarded as the guardian angel or the patron saint of Wales. There he would be able to offer proper homage to Saint David as a true Briton, as a true descendant of the British race, as a true son of the British people. Then the next stanza begins. Here in this stanza, the poet explains why one should choose to leave England or leave London in particular. He says, for who would leave unbribed Hibernia's land or change the rocks of Scotland for the Strand? Strand ordinarily means a strand road, a riverside road. And here, the Strand signifies the city of London because the Strand road beside River Thames runs through the middle of the city of London. So here the Strand signifies the city of London itself. And the poet puts forward a rhetorical question saying, who would leave unless one is paid a handsome bribe Hibernia's land, that means Ireland or Scotland, for the Strand or for the city of London? He means to say that nobody would prefer London over Ireland or over Scotland unless one is paid a handsome price for that choice or for that decision. Unless one is bribed otherwise, one would never choose or prefer England to Ireland or Scotland. There none are swept by sudden fate away, but all whom hunger spares with age decay. Now he says that in England or in London in particular, people often have untimely deaths, which is very uncommon in those lands, in Scotland or Ireland. There, that means in Scotland or Ireland or in other places of Europe, none are swept by sudden fate away. None are untimely killed, untimely perished by the fatal hand of destiny. But all whom hunger spares with age decay. Unless, of course, they are perished by starvation, they naturally die when they come at old age, which is come at the particular old age when one would die in any way, when it is very natural, very normal for one to die, to decay. Here means in the city of London, malice, rapine, accident, conspire, and now a rabble rages, now a fire. Their ambush here relentless ruffians lay, and here the fell attorney prowls for prey. Here falling houses thunder on your head, and here a female atheist talks you dead. He says that, but here, in the city of London, you are always threatened, your existence is always jeopardized by malice, rapine, accident, and conspiracies. He means to say that London society is full of malicious people. Here often you may encounter a rapine or a seizure of property, some sort of a raid. Often your property, often your houses may be raided by government officials for no good reason at all. An accident. Here you may die an untimely death because of accidents, which are very much rampant here. And conspire. Conspire means conspiracy or conspiracies. Here in London, you are prone to conspiracies by people around you, by the government officials, by politicians or members of political parties. And now a rabble rages, now a fire. And this society of London is always turbulent. It is always disturbing, always disturbed. Often mob violences erupt here. Rabble actually means sort of a mob violence. Often you will see the eruption of a mob violence in which you may be killed or you may be wounded. Now a fire, and often a fire breaks out in the city of London, which threatens our existence, which threatens to demolish our properties. Then he says, the adverse description of London society, of London life continues. Their ambush here relentless ruffians lay, and here the fell attorney prowls for prey. Ruffians are roguish people, and Dr. Johnson, the poet, means to say that London society is full of such ruffians, full of such roguish people, full of such criminals who often start their ambush, who often start erupting violence in the society. And the cruel attorney, the cruel advocates, cruel lawyers are always in search of their praise. Here, lawyers who are supposed to protect people from all sorts of wrongs are always busy to earn their profit by exploiting innocent people. Here falling houses thunder on your head, and in London society you are never safe. Sometimes a house might collapse on your head and thus perish you, And here a female atheist talks you dead. I'm not sure of the topical reference here. A female atheist might mean any radical woman who was a prominent figure at that time in the society in which Dr. Johnson himself lived. There might be some some indirect reference to a prominent historical personality, but I'm not sure of the who that exact person might be. Here, a female atheist might simply mean any radical lady who would talk nonsense, who would talk irrelevantly and bore you to death. We must remember that Dr. Samuel Johnson was himself a devout Anglican, so it is possible that he would not tolerate, or he would not be kind to someone who is atheist or who is radical. So perhaps a female atheist refers to some radical lady in the then English society whom Dr. Johnson despised, whom Dr. Johnson disapproved of. And so he says here that in London society you may often find a female atheist or a radical lady whose nonsense talks would bore you to death. So London society is not a fit place to live in. Then the next stanza begins. While Thales waits the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth the small remains, on Thames's banks in silent thought we stood, where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood. Now, Thales and the poet are waiting on the banks of River Thames for a ferry or a wherry which will take Thales to the place where he wants to settle, where he wants to settle in, that is the countryside of England, the land of Cambria or the Wales. So now, in order to reach Cambria or the Wales, these two people, the poet and his friend Thales, are waiting on the banks of Thames. And standing upon the banks of Thames, they can have a glimpse of the city of Greenwich, which seems to be smiling, which seems to be glazing on the silvery, dazzling waters of Thames on the opposite side of the river. Struck with the seat that gave Eliza birth, we kneel and kiss the consecrated earth. Now, Greenwich was the birthplace of Queen Elizabeth I, who ruled England from 1558 to 1603. And Queen Elizabeth I was a model for sovereignty, a model for an ideal ruler for the Tories. And Dr. Johnson himself, being a Tory, admired Queen Elizabeth I very much, and he says that the consecrated land, the pure, the sacred land of Greenwich, in which Elizabeth I was born, commands our respect, and we are struck, we are very much awed, we are very much overwhelmed by the sight of the sacred land of Greenwich, and we kneel before it and we kiss the sacred ground. In pleasing dreams the blissful age renew, and call Britannia's glories back to view. And he then remembers the past glory of England under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. and the glories, the glamorous aspects of the Elizabethan period appear in front of his eyes in a form of a vision, in the form of a dream. In pleasing dreams, the blissful age renew. He can perceive a renewal, a revival of that great age, of that glorious age of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and he can have a view back to the glorious days of Britannia. Britannia here means Britain or England. Behold her cross triumphant on the main, the gird of commerce and the dread of Spain. Here there is a reference to the victory of the British Navy over the Spanish Armada in 1588, when Queen Elizabeth I was on the English throne. And here Dr. Johnson refers to that event, saying, behold her cross triumphant on the main. Here the main is an archaic word for sea. He imagines that he can see a British naval fleet on the sea, which guards the commercial glory, the commercial supremacy of England, and which threatens, which frightens the Spanish Armada, the Spanish fleet of warships. Ere masquerades debauched, excise oppressed, of our English honor grew a standing jest. And now he thinks that after the Elizabethan and Caroline periods, now at present, English glory, or the glory of England, has become a mere jest. It has become a matter of joke, because our society has been debased and our people are continually being oppressed by whimsical imposition of different kinds of duties and taxes. Here there is a very direct reference to the imposition of excise duties, excise taxes on the British citizens by Sir Robert Walpole in the year 1733. As Walpole was a Whig and Dr. Johnson was a Tory, he, like many others, criticized Walpole's step of enhancing excise duties on both foreign goods as well as the home productions of different kinds of goods in the year 1733. And here he says that the glory of Britain, which was then in full fledged under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, has now diminished and has now become merely a matter of joke when our society is oppressed by such enhanced taxes and levies, and our culture, our values seem to be debased by some indecent and rather stupid practices like masquerades. Masquerade, as we know, is a sort of dance in which people wear masks on their faces to conceal their real identities. So, Dr. Johnson means to say that now our society has been debauched or debased, seduced, corrupted, vitiated by such obscene and trivial cultural practices, and our society has also been oppressed by the whimsical imposition and enhancement of undue taxes and levies, which have caused the English honor, the British honor, to be to be a matter of joke, to be a standing jest. A transient calm the happy scenes bestow, and for a moment lull the sense of awe. So, the vision of the past glory of England during the reign of Elizabeth I, the commercial supremacy of England over the entire world, the victory of the British military fleet over the Spanish Armada, all these scenes of glory are transient. All these scenes of glory give the minds of these two people, give the minds of the poet himself and that of his friend Tales, a transient calm, a temporary calm, a momentary peace, which is very short lived, and for a moment lull the sense of awe, and our remembrance of the past glory of our land for a moment pacifies our mental woes, our anxieties, which are caused by the present situation of our state, the present situation of our city. At length awaking with contemptuous frown, indignant Tales eyes the neighbouring town. Now the poet prepares the ground for a long speech by Tales. He says that at length awaking, after reviving himself from the vision of England's past glory, now Thales is frowning very contemptuously at the city of London. He is very contemptuous, he is very disrespectful to the city of London. That is why a frown comes on his face. And he is indignant, he is very angry because he thinks that a great injustice has been done. Indignant Tales eyes the neighboring town. He takes a look at the neighboring town. A neighboring town means the town of London, the city of London, at which Tales takes a look very contemptuously and indignantly. And then from the next line, Tales' speech ensues, which constitutes the rest of the poem. So let us stop here for the time being, and we shall continue from line 35 onwards in our next session. Thank you.